And that's a really broad topic. And so I'm going to narrow it to like 3 things that I'm going to work through. The first is not super interesting, but is super important, which are some basic definitional and conceptual issues. And this matters because how the news media tend to talk about cybersecurity and cyber attacks is different from how people in the academic and policy communities talk about these issues. So I'm going to work through what people like me, social scientists, and folks in the policy community mean when we talk about cyber issues. Second, I'll talk a bit about why this is on your syllabus as an independent subject. Why is cyber, why are computer networks different from other kinds of technologies that we care about in international politics? And last, I'll get into some of the policy implications of the differences between cyber and other domains and where we are now, which is not very far, which makes it really interesting and exciting for all of us as potential scholars, and hopefully some of us will end up going into policy too. So I'll start with a quick example before turning to the definitions and concepts, which introduces a lot of the reasoning that is really important to understand regarding cybersecurity and why it is a different area from other kinds of technologies. And the one that I've chosen is my personal favorite. I like talking about devices because we have devices everywhere that have computers. Your phone is now a computer, and it is connected to the internet with lots of data flowing all of the time. And as these devices are put all over the world, they're put there for convenience. It's creating some kind of behavior that makes life easier or better for us. But every time we do that, it's introducing some kind of new vulnerability. So the example I've chosen, my personal favorite, because it hits every level from individual privacy up through international security and has a high creepiness factor, is surveillance cameras. What you're looking at is an image of a hacked surveillance camera at a software company. So all of the question marks are covering up the logo for the company, so you can't identify whose security was breached in this instance. And if you take a moment and think, okay, what can I do with a hacked security camera, and why are security cameras getting hacked? It starts to get into some of the really interesting conceptual issues in cybersecurity. So the reason we have internet-based surveillance cameras is because you can just take the camera out of a box, plug it into the wall, and if there's Wi-Fi, you create a surveillance network. Wherever you put a camera, it can communicate with other cameras and send a video feed back to a control room somewhere. The old way you used to do this is closed circuit. You would run wires through walls and have lots of infrastructure to do security. So what this lets you do is, in a really cheap, in terms of labor and capital way, create security for yourself. But you're also creating insecurity for yourself at the same time. So if you're connected to the global internet, it turns out that there are billions of people on the global internet, and if they happen to know about software vulnerabilities in whatever you're using, they can exploit that and gain access remotely. And part of the logic I'll keep coming back to is any device, any computer, and any computer network that is intended to interact with things in the world is going to have some of these vulnerabilities built into it. You cannot help the fact that they're going to be software exploits. And so this starts to get really interesting when you think about it in the aggregate. So if I'm a company, I would care about this because what can you see if you've looked at my surveillance camera? I can see people typing in usernames and passwords. I can see intellectual property. I can see what's on computer screens. So I know about unannounced software products. Or if it's a hardware company, I can see the next generation phone that they haven't released yet. You can elevate network privileges after getting usernames and passwords and having gotten onto that company's internal network. If you're a military, you may care about other things. In that case, it might be something like physical security. You can see where all the security personnel are. You get a sense for the hours of least activity. And that's important if you're defending a military base. But we use cameras for lots of other things. One example from the insurgency in Iraq was insurgents using less than $30 commercial off-the-shelf software to gain access to the video feed from Predator unmanned aerial vehicles. And this actually happened. This is not just a hypothetical of a security researcher pointing out that you can hack cameras. It's actually using UAVs in theater to watch insurgents to try to catch people planting IEDs and doing other nefarious things in a counterinsurgency environment. And the insurgents were able to capture the feed themselves so that they can see what the US military was looking at. And so very quickly you get from what are the individual privacy implications, you all have webcams on your computers, to the level of a company and what a company cares about, and now the level of what militaries care about. And it could actually get worse than just gaining access for something like intelligence. So there's actually malware. Malware means malicious software, software intended to cause harm, found on the control systems for unmanned aerial vehicles, the ones that are run out of Nevada. And so what does this mean? In this case, it was probably a benign event. Somebody probably connected something to the network that they shouldn't have, and thankfully they found the software and were able to clean it up, and they were able to deal with the malware incident. But we don't know how many of these exploits exist and how many adversaries know about. And so in the event of a conflict, you run into a problem where if you end up finding malware on your UAV fleet during war, what does that mean for you in terms of making risk calculations about whether or not your enemy can cause your own drones to crash into your own people and to fly into a barracks at some forward operating base? And that's capturing the kinds of issues I'll be talking about today across lots of different sorts of devices, just having started with this example.